This play sums up the state of the Baltimore Ravens offense in recent seasons. It's a tight formation, and although Lamar Jackson is in shotgun, the heavy personnel package means this is definitely a run-oriented formation. Carolina responds appropriately with 9 defenders in the box. There will be 3 eligible receivers on the wide side of the field who are going to release into routes. The receiver in motion will run a wheel route, the outside receiver a post route, and the tight end to that side an angled curl route. Jackson will keep the ball to throw after showing it to the running back. All we really need to know about the defense is that the 2 defenders to the top of the screen will play man coverage. When the play rolls on, we can see the deeper defender turn to run with the receiver who runs inside. That leaves 1 defender outside with 2 receivers in routes. Jackson recognises this blown coverage instantly. He can see the defender widening, but his eyes stay on the quarterback. That, along with the cornerback's posture, tells Jackson that while it looks like he's covering the wheel route, he's actually covering the curl route underneath. The cornerback wants Jackson to throw the ball to the flat so he can come up and make the tackle. But the quarterback is smarter than that. He knows how to avoid being baited by defenders in coverage, and he holds the ball just long enough before the free pass rusher hits him so that the cornerback is put in no man's land between the 2 receivers. It's still a very difficult pass, but Jackson is able to throw a perfect touch pass that his receiver should run through down the sideline. But as you can see more clearly from the end zone angle, the wheel route receiver is fullback Patrick Ricard. It's a great meme, and it's funny when he makes plays, but it's not funny for the quarterback who has to throw passes to a fullback, to a player who is not built to make plays he needs to make in those situations, and Jackson is doing this all the time. It's not a one-off trick play. If a competent wide receiver ran this route, Jackson would likely have been credited with a 63-yard touchdown. But because the Ravens have proven either inept or unwilling to invest in good receivers and have leaned too far into running the ball as their identity, Jackson's numbers have suffered, and so in turn, his perception suffers. He's expected to be the whole offense in Baltimore. He's the focal point of the running game, and he has to carry the passing game. And yet when it comes to paying him what he's worth, the Ravens are trying to make him fight for it. And they're pulling the wool over the eyes of the fans, because it's not like they're going to use that money they saved against the cap on acquiring high-end talent on offense to improve his supporting cast and make the team more likely to win a Super Bowl. Jackson would thrive if he was given even an average supporting cast, but instead, the Ravens wasted his rookie contract years so that he's never played with a true number 1 caliber wide receiver, never mind having 2 receivers who are uncoverable like many teams in the league do. The Ravens have repeatedly loaded up on defensive acquisitions, giving up draft picks and big contracts, while expecting Jackson to carry the whole offense on a shoestring budget. When you build a team the way the Ravens have, is it any surprise that DeMarcus Robinson and Willie Snead are 2 of the best wide receivers that Lamar Jackson has ever played with, receivers who were 4th or 5th choices at their previous teams? It's not exactly AJ Brown and Devonta Smith or Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. And yet, despite being given all the ingredients of an awful passing game, Jackson has consistently excelled as a passer. This is 3rd and 8 against the New York Jets deep in Ravens territory. The Ravens have an empty backfield. The tight end at the bottom of the screen will chip block the edge rusher, but that's the only help the offensive line gets. Defensively, the Jets are sending 5 rushers after the quarterback, so it's 1-on-1. They're playing man coverage in behind with a safety deep, so it's cover 1. When we roll the play on, we can see at the top of the screen the defensive line executes a stunt that sends the first defender through unblocked. Jackson has a defender bearing down on him from the moment he starts his drop back. At the top of his drop, all 4 of his receivers downfield are covered, while the tight end is only starting his route with a defender waiting for him. The end zone angle shows us that Jackson's eyes are on the deep safety even as the pass rusher closes to him. Jackson is taking the safety away from Mark Andrews, his tight end who is running a crossing route in the opposite direction. But number 29 is also a problem for Andrews. The defender is deep enough that he can sink underneath the route if the ball is thrown before he has to fully commit to the flat route underneath. So Jackson needs to hold the ball long enough for him to move, but not so long that the unblocked pass rusher sacks him. It's a tiny window. He achieves this by gaining depth and moving sideways. He's now throwing the ball off his back foot into very tight coverage, but at least it's a 1-on-1, and number 29 can't intercept the ball before it reaches Andrews. Andrews has a chance. Jackson delivers a phenomenal touch throw to Andrews, who fends the cornerback off as he attempts to undercut the catch point. Andrews had no separation here, but Jackson understood his size and the leverage he would have in that route against that coverage, so he threw to a spot that gave him a chance at making the play. The only spot that gave him a chance at making the play. Mark Andrews has dropped too many passes over the course of his career to be compared to the very best tight ends in the league, but he is Jackson's only receiving option who can consistently get open and win at the catch point. Andrews is the Ravens' de facto number 1 wide receiver, but he is still a tight end, so he has certain limitations. But when opposing defenses blitz, such as on this play against the New York Giants, that's where Jackson wants to go with the ball. The Giants are sending 5 players after Jackson, but the Ravens are going to keep a tight end in pass protection, which invites the 6th rusher forward. There's no hesitation for Jackson at the top of his drop. He plants his back foot and begins his throwing motion at the same time. He has to be this quick because the edge rusher is already around the tight end to his right side. From the wider view, we can see the routes at the top of the screen were slow developing, so they were never a factor. Andrews began to play in the slot on the near side, and he's running a fade into the end zone. The running back who lined up outside of him is running underneath on an in-breaking route. Lamar understands the leverage of the defender on Andrews and the presence of the safety coming over from the middle of the field. He perfectly drops the ball onto Andrews' outside shoulder so that another defender is a factor in the catch point. Andrews isn't as flexible or dynamic as Travis Kelce in space, but he can use his size well when the ball is put in the right spot. In the same game against the Giants, Jackson connects with Andrews again down the right seam. This time the offense is relying on all vertical routes to stretch the field. Defensively, the Giants are playing cover 3, so Jackson has to pick apart his zone this time, instead of placing the ball away from the man coverage defender like he did in the previous play. This all happens very fast, but Jackson looks to the left side at the start of his drop back. He can see the cornerback outside dropping off, so the routes to that side of the field aren't an option. His eye movement holds the safety in the middle of the field. As Jackson is looking left, Andrews is running to his space on the right. The quarterback turns his eyes and feet to the opposite side as soon as he hits the top of his drop and immediately starts his throwing motion. But there's something unexpected in the coverage. The outside zone defender to Jackson's right is still in field. He's reading the quarterback's eyes after abandoning his outside zone. This was either an educated guess because no receiver ran to his area, or he just got lucky. But regardless of how it happened, he is now going to put himself directly in the passing lane, and Jackson has to solve that problem. It's a problem for Jackson because he wanted to put the ball on his tight end's body to protect him from the deep safety. Instead of doing that, Jackson was able to push the ball high above the outreached hand of the linebacker while placing the ball slightly behind and outside of Andrews. It makes for a more difficult catch, but it protects him from the safety coming across the field. It turns the tight end around, stops his momentum, and allows him to protect himself from the incoming hit. If Jackson hadn't made this very quick adjustment, Andrews would have suffered a very dangerous hit at the catch point. It's a great read, but it's also a great throw into a tiny window. Against the Carolina Panthers, we get another example of Jackson's understanding of coverages and how to protect his receivers. It's another empty set when the running back goes in motion to the wide side of the field. The Ravens are going to keep their tight end to the bottom of the screen in the block before he releases into a route late in the play. The rest of the routes are all releasing vertically. It's another aggressive defensive play call with the defense playing cover 1 again. Jackson's eyes go left. He has no intention of throwing left, but he looks to his seam route on that side to lead the deep safety to that area of the field. He saw the defender moving before the snap with his running back in motion, which confirmed it was man coverage. That means Mark Andrews should be open on the back end of the play. Andrews beats the cornerback trying to cover him, and Jackson purposely sits him down in his route so that he's protected from the deep safety. The end zone angle gives us a better appreciation of this play. Firstly, we're going to see how quickly Jackson transitions from looking left to throwing right. This is what tells us he was never going to throw left. There was no hesitation going back to the right side and starting his throwing motion because he knew what he was going back to see. By instantly snapping into his throwing motion and looking in the opposite direction, the deep safety has no time to recover his position. That's a very purposeful act from the quarterback. When Andrews catches the ball, you can see that he's not far away from being in the safety's sights for a big hit. If Jackson hadn't held the safety initially, this is where the safety would be. He'd be at the catch point. If Jackson hadn't sit Andrews down in his route and instead led him across the field, this is where he would be. Again, at the mercy of the safety's shoulder. If he didn't do either, he would have put the ball too far in front of his intended target and led the safety to that spot, so it would have been an easy interception. But Jackson did do everything he was supposed to do. His technique and his ability as a pocket passer here were perfect, and it exploited the weak spot in the coverage for the big play. Against the Bengals, the Ravens use another 6-man pass protection with vertical routes strung across the field. The Bengals respond with an interesting coverage. It's a 6-man blitz, but it's not cover 0 because they're playing zone coverage rather than man. They have 4 defenders covering the intermediate level and 1 deep safety. Jackson hits the top of his drop and has a clean pocket initially. This gives him time to take stock of the coverage. He wants his crossing route but sees the linebacker dropping into the passing lane with the safety coming over the top. Jackson doesn't want to throw over this linebacker because to do so will lead his receiver into the safety. The chances of this ball being intercepted are high if he throws it at this point, so he changes the layout of the play. By relocating his position slightly behind the line of scrimmage, Jackson puts himself in position to throw through the passing lane instead of over the linebacker. This subtle change allows him to throw the ball with a completely different trajectory. This will not only allow him to avoid the linebacker, it will also change how the ball arrives to the receiver. From the end zone angle, we can see Jackson change location and the journey the ball takes to the receiver. The safety is not a factor at all at the catch point. If he stayed where he was, Jackson's pass would have looked more like this and invited the safety to come through the receiver as he caught the ball. Devin Duvernay is just a speed receiver. He doesn't make contested catches, so he needed Jackson to set him up for success here. He needed his quarterback to do the hard work for him. The Buccaneers send a 6-man blitz of their own after Jackson here. It's a popular approach against him because you can fill all the running lanes to stop him from scrambling, and you can play man coverage against their receivers who won't consistently get open. Jackson is looking to his left from the start of this play. His eyes are on the curl route that you can see at the top of the screen. It's not wide open, and there's a crossing route running into the same area of the field. Jackson has a defender bearing down on him at the top of his drop, so the ball has to come out. If we flip to this wider view for a moment, we can see the defender behind the curl route is going to be directly in the passing lane to cover Mark Andrews' crossing route, route while sitting on the upfield shoulder of the receiver who ran the curl route. This is a condensed field and a tiny window for the quarterback. Since Jackson's eyes are on the curl route, the defender doesn't immediately move into the passing lane to Andrews. You can see him push his weight back towards the curl route before he reacts to the ball in the air and tries to get to it before it reaches Andrews. Jackson's ball placement is phenomenal. He hits a window that barely exists so that Andrews can catch the ball in stride going across the field. It's a perfectly thrown ball, which would be impressive if he stared Andrews down all across the field, but since he concentrated on the curl route and let Andrews come into his field of vision, the throw is even more difficult than you first think. Without that extremely high technical execution, Andrews wouldn't have gained 22 yards. The Indianapolis Colts are going to break the theme of this video so far here. The Ravens have an empty set with 2 receivers on the wide side and 3 receivers on the narrow side to the top of the screen. The Colts show a 5-man blitz this time, but they're going to drop out of it into a 4-man rush. The middle linebacker is going to spy Jackson instead of rushing after him. When Jackson hits the top of his drop, his eyes go right. With the safety in the middle of the field and the tight alignment of the receiver stack, there's space for his deep route to go outside. But his receiver is well covered to start the play, so Jackson doesn't let his eyes linger on that area of the field for too long. He brings his eyes back to his crossing route over the middle of the field, and now the spying linebacker becomes a factor. He's in the passing lane watching the quarterback's eyes. Jackson has to push the ball past his outstretched arm just to get the ball past the line of scrimmage safely. He does that, and then he has to clear the cornerback that is tightly covering Rashad Bateman underneath. He does that too. Of course, to be an efficient quarterback you have to be able to hit tight windows like this, but it's not always like that. The best quarterbacks locate the open receivers for easier, higher percentage plays more often. This play against the Saints is a great example of that. One thing that is really obvious but often underappreciated is that good quarterbacks know where their receivers are. They understand what the play is before it starts. The defense has to react, of course. They don't have to look for them after the snap, so they can fully focus on reading the coverage instead. Sometimes lesser quarterbacks will fail to do this and look for their receivers instead of looking at the coverage. It's a vital aspect of this play because the Saints are running cover 1 robber, but with a cornerback sprinting across the field to pick up the tight end at the bottom of the screen when the ball is snapped. The middle of the field is a packed crowd when Jackson hits the top of his drop. The safety rotation created a 3 versus 2 in that area that shut down both routes. This aggressive action should have opened up a shot play down the right sideline. The opposite safety is nowhere near the space where Jackson would throw the ball to that route. But Ravens receivers don't often win routes outside the numbers against aggressive man coverage. This leaves Jackson with his drag route tight end working underneath. From the end zone angle, we can see that Jackson's eyes are on the deep safety and the tight end is working across the field while the defender responsible for him is going in the opposite direction. Jackson could check the ball down to his tight end immediately, but that would lead him into the crowd that formed in the middle of the field. But instead, he begins running right and then he stops short of escaping into the flat because he knows if he stops here and keeps his eyes in the middle of the field, the defenders over the middle have to stay with their receivers there. This means there will be more space for the tight end outside after he catches the ball. The backup tight end is able to catch the ball unopposed, turn upfield unopposed, and cross the first down line for a first down unopposed. That's all because of the work of the quarterback. The Ravens make good use of empty formations with Jackson. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL working from empty, and that's while relying on running backs and tight ends and wide receiver positions more often than other quarterbacks. For this play, he has a post route and an out route on the near side of the field to the bottom of the screen. Carolina are playing quarters coverage. The outside cornerback is Jackson's focus as he hits the top of his drop. If that cornerback sinks, Jackson can hit the out route. If he jumps forward, there might be a chance to hit the post route. Jackson uses a pump fake to pull the outside cornerback forward. His fake also encourages the underneath defender to widen and the safety over the top over pursues at the same time. This puts DeMarcus Robinson in an ocean of space as a catch point that otherwise wouldn't have existed. The Giants are going to get pressure on Jackson at the top of his drop when he goes into empty on this play. A key detail here is that edge rusher Kayvon Thibodeau is going to drop into coverage on the right side. You'll understand why in a minute, but first, let's watch Giants nose tackle Dexter Lawrence make mincemeat over the Ravens center so that he gets his right hand to the chest of the quarterback as the ball is about to leave his hand. Fortunately for the Ravens, Jackson stands in strong and takes that contact. Switching to the wide angle view, we can see Thibodeau is running underneath the slant route to the top of the screen. Jackson wanted to catch and release the ball to that slant route, which would have made Lawrence's pass rush irrelevant, but Thibodeau's presence forced him to hold the ball. Jackson had the intelligence to understand Thibodeau wouldn't be able to turn and run with his receiver, so that slant route would come open in the next window inside. He successfully throws the ball past the defender in space despite the pressure on him in the pocket. Pressure doesn't faze Jackson. He's famous for his athleticism, but if he was a statue who couldn't move, he'd receive huge plaudits for being a great pocket passer. When you can run, people just assume you're not good in the pocket. On this play against the Patriots, the quarterback reaches the top of his drop and has nobody open. At the same time, 3 defensive linemen are closing in on Jackson. He has nowhere to go and the sack is imminent, but he doesn't panic. He holds the ball for a beat so his checkdown clears the underneath defender. That checkdown turns into a good gain because Jackson had let the play fully develop instead of rushing the ball out when there wasn't an obvious solution. He never looked to drop his eyes or move his feet. The Bengals get to Jackson at the top of his drop on this play, but unlike the previous Giants example, this time the defender will get a full body hit on the quarterback. Jackson executes the play fake and turns around to look for his slow developing routes downfield. The Ravens were expecting a clean pocket here, but without starting left tackle Ronnie Stanley, Jackson doesn't get it. It's 1st and 10, so he's not in desperate need of a play. He doesn't have to force a throw here, and just avoiding the sack at this stage is a good play. But Jackson doesn't just get rid of the ball, he actually pushes it downfield to Andrews in between 3 defenders for a 20-yard gain. Jackson had to get the touch exactly right here, otherwise the ball would have been intercepted. This is also a far hash throw to the opposite sideline from a deep drop, so it's a much deeper throw than the 20 yards that it ultimately gains. There's no flinching in Jackson. He stands in strong and tall. He takes hits and prioritises the quality of his pass over protecting himself. Critically, he also understands how to speed up his process when he needs to get rid of the ball to avoid being hit. Going back to the Patriots game, this time the Ravens offense sends 3 receivers on vertical releases, uses 1 receiver in play action as a sweep in the backfield, and 1 stays in as a 6th pass blocker. Defensively, the Patriots are playing passively. They're sitting back in quarters coverage. It's 1st and 10, so they don't need to chase the play. Jackson executes the play fake, but it doesn't slow down the rusher coming off the edge to his left. That's a side of the field Jackson's eyes open to. He's moving the linebacker highlighted in green to a wider position. The other off-ball linebacker is widening towards the opposite sideline because of the receivers who release passes outside shoulder and the end-around receiver he's watching in the flat. From the end zone angle, we get a clearer view of the window that creates over the middle of the field. At the same time, the edge rusher is working quickly through the pulling lineman that picked him up as he advanced towards the quarterback. Jackson gets the ball out before he can get home, showing the speed of his process. His timing had to be perfect to connect with Andrews before the defensive back behind him closed in the catch point. It allowed for an 11-yard gain and a 1st down. You can see Jackson do the same thing here against the New Orleans Saints. The Ravens left guard is going to get beaten across his face immediately at the snap. This means Jackson is not only under premature pressure, but it's premature pressure that penetrates through the middle of the pocket. That's impossible for him to escape from in this situation. Jackson has to avoid this sack with his mind, and he does that by rapidly getting the ball out and connecting with his underneath receiver before the coverage can account for him. The play results in a 1st down when the pass protection should have guaranteed that it would be a sack. Jackson's feel for pressure and his understanding of how much time he has is consistently outstanding. The Panthers are showing a cover 0 blitz on 3rd down on this play. This is the most intimidating fronted quarterback in the NFL can face. Some quarterbacks will panic at the very threat of it before the snap, so that they beat themselves after the snap. The Panthers aren't actually using a cover 0 blitz here though, which means the challenge is even greater for Jackson because he's got to figure that out. The linebacker to the top of the defensive line is going to drop into coverage. Jackson's eyes go to the slot cornerback on his right side when the play begins. If the cover 0 blitz came, he'd throw to the inside slant. That's the only route he'd have time to throw to. If the defender to that side drops, he will instead overlook the first slant and look to the wider slant route. Because Jackson looks in this area, he can see that defender drop. But critically, it's also important to note that the unblocked rusher is coming from the furthest possible point on the opposite side of the offensive line, so the pass protection was set properly. Brian Burns is that defensive end, and he's very fast. So while Jackson has a moment to work, he doesn't have much more than that. He uses the time he has to manipulate the linebacker to move him out of the passing lane with a pump fake. That defender is looking for the receiver outside as the ball flies past him upfield. The slot cornerback was taken away by the first slant route, vacating the space at the catch point for the second slant route. All of Jackson's work in the pocket affords Demarcus Robinson the opportunity to catch and run the ball downfield for a 31-yard gain. Jackson is the rare quarterback who shows great patience and feel inside the pocket and outside the pocket. Whether it's buying time in the pocket by changing depth so that your receiver gets time to get open, such as on this play against the Cleveland Browns, or doing the same before escaping into the right flat to throw a touchdown pass to the back of the end zone like this against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Jackson is always elevating the players around him, making their jobs easier and ruining the good work of the defenders playing against him. Those technical qualities tied with his athleticism and accuracy make him an oftentimes unstoppable quarterback. More often than not, it's his supporting cast that stops him rather than the defense. That's the reason he doesn't put up consistently amazing passing numbers. That supporting cast is also why Jackson's pure arm talent has been underappreciated throughout his career. This is a near hash out route throw, so it's not the most difficult version of this throw. That would be a far hash out route throw. But it's 3rd and 13, and the success of the play hinges solely on Jackson's ability to time the throw and generate enough velocity to beat the cornerback with the ball. The cornerback is sitting in off-man coverage at the 1st down line. He wants Jackson to throw this ball across his face so he can break on it and run the interception back in the opposite direction. But he's never a factor because Jackson's ball is thrown on a rope and placed perfectly so the receiver can not only catch the ball but turn upfield for the 1st down. Against the Browns, Jackson is going to look for his isolated receiver on the narrow side once again, but this time the receiver is running a streak down the sideline against press man coverage. The Browns front is pulled forward by the run-oriented alignment, which means only the deep safety is a factor in the coverage for Jackson. That deep safety moves to the middle of the field at the snap, taking himself away from the receiver outside. Jackson recognizes the opportunity instantly, so you can see he has begun his throwing motion very early in the receiver's route. The receiver is just about level with the defender when Jackson lets the ball go. Despite the tight coverage, the defender never sees the ball when he turns around to look for it. That's because Jackson has perfectly flighted it to his receiver, dropping it over his inside shoulder and leading him far upfield for the uncontested catch. The Ravens' offense isn't built to throw outside the numbers. They hoped Miles Boykin could develop into that outside target, but he never did. Jackson doesn't have a Jamar Chase caliber of receiver who he can always go to when he gets single coverage outside the numbers. Rashad Bateman hasn't played enough yet to be that guy, and in truth his skill set is nowhere near as good as Chase's or any of the elite receivers. He's an above average or good receiver, and Jackson showed what he could get from a receiver with even just an above average skill set when he played. Bateman is a receiver at the top of the screen on this play against the Jets. It's a shot play designed with Bateman running straight down the middle of the field. Jackson has 3 extra pass blockers and uses play action to create a clean pocket. Defensively, the Jets are playing quarters with 4 deep defenders and 4 players chasing the quarterback. Since the Jets aren't blitzing, the pass rush is essentially non-existent. On the back end, the safety to Bateman's side blows his coverage. He appears to think he's playing Tampa 2, so he goes too far wide. This opens the window down the middle of the field for Bateman. Jackson is standing on his own 36-yard line when he releases the ball. It flies through the air and sustains velocity all the way to the Jets' 5-yard line, where Bateman catches it for the touchdown. That's at least a 60-yard throw for Jackson. After Bateman was hurt during last season, the Ravens were desperate for receivers and wound up adding Deshaun Jackson. At 36 years of age, Jackson is no longer a viable starter at this level, but he's still really fast. So that alone put him ahead of everyone on the wide receiver depth chart except for DeMarcus Robinson. Deshaun is in the right slot here against the Jaguars. He is running a deep crossing route that draws the middle linebacker and pulls the safety with him over the top. Deshaun is downfield in a hurry, and Lamar recognises the mismatch, so he winds up and hurtles the ball into the space on the opposite side of the field. Lamar had to move from the top of his drop to avoid the inside pressure before setting up the throw at the 7-yard line near the right hash mark. He connects with Deshaun on the 30-yard line, outside the numbers on the opposite side of the field. That's a 70-plus yard throw from the quarterback, and it's on the money. That's what he does when he actually has speed and separation in his routes. The Ravens have invested a lot of capital in big-bodied players who can run block to try and build an offense that could help create space for Jackson in the running game. But if they had instead stocked up on wide receivers and embraced the spread formation, if they'd embraced speed, Jackson would have found space more easily in the running game because the defense would be forced to focus on the passing game more and respect the outside threats more. Instead, the offense has become one-dimensional and overly reliant on their superstar quarterback to carry them, and even after he's proven he can do that, they still won't pay him what he's worth. That's the best case scenario when it comes to perspectives on what the Ravens have done and what the wider NFL has done. The worst case scenario suggests something else.